Alright, thank you guys for coming. Everything today is all about pumpkin. As you know, who is a pumpkin fan? Quite a few of us. Good. Me too. Is anybody a pumpkin spice latte fan?
Yes.
I love them. Love them. My bubble got burst big time a couple weeks ago though. One of my friends shared with me an article that broke down all the different variations of pumpkin spice lattes, whether you get it whole milk, 2% skim, no with whatever. Broke all the specific ones down into how many minutes it takes to burn that off on the treadmill. And it completely burst my bubble and I've not had one since. So if you have an addiction to pumpkin spice lattes, let me know. I'll send you the article. It might help temper you down a little bit. But today all of our recipes are healthy pumpkin recipes. Does anybody know why pumpkin is sometimes called a superfood, or what about it is so good for you?
Because of the protein and all the stuff we had in the newsletter.
You got it. Sorry, I already gave it away in the newsletter. Yeah, so a half a cup of pumpkin puree. So first of all, remember that if you're buying this from the store, pumpkin puree and pumpkin pie filling are not the same thing, right? The pumpkin pie filling is full of the sugar and all of the extra stuff that's basically like eating the inside of pumpkin pie. That's not what we're going for. We're going for healthy. We're going for healthy. We're going for the pumpkin puree. So half a cup only has 50 calories, only 0.5 grams of fat, and half a cup has 250% of your vitamin A. You're totally loading up on your vitamin A here. And you have good fiber. You got 3 grams of fiber for that. So some really good stuff in here. And it adds good flavor. And this says on the lid, has anybody ever substituted pumpkin puree for like oil or eggs or butter in your recipes? Yeah, it works out really well. Some of these cans have the substitutions listed on the lid, like 1/4 a cup of pumpkin puree is 1 egg. You can sub it 1:1 for oil. 3/4 of a cup of pumpkin you can sub for 1 cup of butter. So really great ways to swap this out. Has anybody ever had the pumpkin brownies or the pumpkin cupcakes where you take a can of pumpkin and then either a box of brownies or a box of cake, and just those 2 ingredients, mix them together, bake them?
Yeah.
Easiest recipe ever, because then you only have to buy 2 things. And you know, you're not adding oil, you're not adding butter, you're not adding eggs, so you're taking out a lot of those extra fat and calories, adding lots of vitamins, good fiber, and they really turn out pretty good. I know the pumpkin puree, if you mix this with a spice cake, turns out pretty good, or yellow cake mix also turns out pretty well. But besides those really easy recipes, we have 3 for you today. So the first one we're going to put together are whole wheat pumpkin pancakes. Has anybody ever had pumpkin pancakes before?
None of it sound good.
Yeah, they are good. And I have made these for people who pumpkin is not their favorite thing ever, and they still really like these. So if you have people in your family who don't like pumpkin, I do think that they'll still like these quite a bit. So this recipe, it's a whole wheat pumpkin, so it's whole wheat, so that means we're using whole grains, so we're getting those fiber, that extra fiber, complex carbs, so your body breaks it down slower, so healthier for your body. Now the thing about whole wheat flour, have you ever baked with it or tried swapping it out for other flours? Yes. If your original recipe calls for like 2 cups of white flour and you sub all of it for 2 cups of whole wheat flour, you're going to end up with a really dense, not very good product. So my suggestion when you are swapping out whole wheat flour is, let's say your recipe calls for 2 cups of flour, use 1 cup of white flour, 1 cup of whole wheat flour. So do a half and half ratio to begin with. See how that turns out, and then tweak it from there. But I would never suggest that you switch all of it over. The only time that you want to use all whole wheat flour is if your original recipe calls for just whole wheat flour. Because white flour and whole wheat flour, they absorb liquids differently. So if you try to do a 1:1 ratio, it's just not going to turn out. But if your original recipe calls for just whole wheat flour, do you know that those really smart food scientist people, they've already figured out what measurements of liquids you need, so you know that you're good to use it. So this recipe, for example, it does call for just whole wheat flour, so we're using just whole wheat flour because we already know that it's going to turn out okay. So we start off with our dry ingredients. You'll notice that the only sugar that we're adding is 2 tablespoons of brown sugar. That's it. So really low on the sugar content. And this recipe makes 6 medium pancakes, and nutrition facts is for 2 pancakes, so you're getting about a third of that sugar, so what is that, like 3/4 of a tablespoon, or half of a tablespoon of sugar, so really good on the sugar content. So we start off with our dry ingredients, then we're going to add in our wet ingredients. So we're gonna use 1/3 cup of pumpkin. You're going to agree with me, this looks like 1/3 cup, right? Right? Yes, all right. You guys are good at this game, I like it. All right, and then we're gonna add 1 egg, and today we're using egg beaters because if you drop egg beaters in your car, they don't crack like an actual egg does. So we're using egg beaters today, a little bit safer of an option for me traveling. And all these say how much you're supposed to use to make 1 egg, so like 1/4 of a cup is 1 large egg. So these do travel well, which is very helpful. Then we have 1 cup of skim milk. If you have a dairy intolerance, you certainly could use a different type of milk instead. Today we are using skim milk, so we add that in. And then 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla. We're going to use pure vanilla extract, not the imitation. Definitely much of a cleaner ingredient here. And then we have 1 tablespoon of butter that has been melted and cooled. Again, add a little bit of flavor here, but again, it's not all that much. So we're going to stir this together. It comes together nice and quick, as you can see. And then once you have your pancake batter come together, you can make them like normal pancakes on the stove. Just remember that if you are making them like normal pancakes, we're not going to put like 2 tablespoons of butter in the pan to fry it in. That kind of defeats the purpose of making healthy pancakes, right? So we definitely want to use that cooking spray. So that's a great option. Another thing that you can do, which is how I have them made for you today, is you can bake them in muffin tins or in mini muffin tins, which is nice if you're having a group of people over. You know, you don't really want to be flipping pancakes. If you're trying to feed your family, it takes a long time. You have to stand over the stove. If you do it in little muffin tins, then it goes a lot quicker, a lot easier. They're all ready at the same time. And if you do make them in the muffin tins, then they also freeze really well also. So we got our pancake batter, and then you can bake them on a stove or in muffin tins. You guys will get to try these out today. This is probably my favorite recipe today. I love them. Any questions on this specific recipe?
Want me to fry them up?
Yeah, can you just make them all right there now? That'd be awesome. Yeah.
Now, if you're making them in muffin tins, would you fill them the same as you would if you were doing actual muffins?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, like I usually fill, like my little mini muffin was like about 3/4 of a way up. Yep. Yep, exactly. And I have it listed on here, so if you're making mini muffin tins, they bake for 10 to 12 minutes. Regular muffin size, 20 to 25 minutes, depending on your oven. I feel like all ovens bake so differently and the heat of them. Okay, next recipe we have our pumpkin chocolate chip energy bites. I know we've made energy bites before, and these are different because they're pumpkin, which is always good at this time of year. So we're going to start off with old-fashioned rolled oats. You certainly could use quick oats instead if you like that texture better. But quick oats and rolled oats are basically the same thing, except that quick oats are just chopped up rolled oats. But as far as nutritionally wise, exactly the same. So we're starting off with our rolled oats, and then we're going to add vanilla protein powder. Now this recipe calls for a plant-based protein powder. A lot of protein powders that you find will be a whey-based, so a dairy protein powder. This one, so similar to how our whole wheat flour and our white flour absorbs liquids differently, same thing, plant-based protein powder and whey protein powders absorb liquids differently. So if you have a recipe that calls for a plant-based protein powder, and if you're somebody who likes to really follow a recipe and doesn't like to try to figure out how you should change it up, then I would use for whatever it calls for, because it'll just change the way that it absorbs. If you have whey protein at home and you decide to make these, just know that it's going to absorb your liquids differently, so you might need to add more oats or you might need to add more pumpkin to find out that right consistency, because it absorbs so differently. Okay, so just make note of that this specific one does call for a plant-based one. And it says right on here, they'll either say whey protein or they'll say a plant-based protein. What's nice is at Hy-Vee, which is where I got these, you can buy little samples of protein powder. So let's say you don't know if you really like a specific brand of protein powder, or maybe you don't make a whole lot of recipes with protein powder. As opposed to buying the big tub for $30, you can just try a little sample. Make sure you like it and like the flavor of it before you buy a lot of it. They do have different flavors, so make sure you find a brand that you like before you go to Sam's Club and get a huge whopping container of it. And this was like $2, so not too bad. So we will add in our protein powder here. As you can see on the nutrition facts for this one, it has 9 grams of protein for one serving, so you're getting pretty good protein in here. Then we're going to add some cinnamon for flavor. You can never have too much cinnamon, in my opinion. And then this recipe calls for Truvia. We're using that Sweet Leaf brand like what we used before. Similar to Truvia or Sweet Leaf, there's other brands out there. It's a baking blend of both stevia and sugar. So it's nice because you're drastically decreasing the amount of sugar that you're using, and then you're also using stevia, which is actually a plant. But sometimes the aftertaste of stevia isn't quite as pleasing to some people, and if you're baking in a recipe, sugar maintains certain properties, so because it's a baking blend, it does work out really well. So we're using this Sweet Leaf brand, and I know I mentioned this last time, but just make for sure that anytime you're using one of the sugar substitutes that you look to see what the substitution is on the back, because each brand will be a little bit different depending on what their baking blend specifically is like. Then we're going to add our 1 cup of pumpkin puree. Again, we're using that pumpkin puree, not our pumpkin pie filling.
Oh, well, that may or may not be.
And then the recipe, just to make note, the recipe does call for 2 tablespoons of mini chocolate chips. However, the ones I made for you guys, definitely I put more than 2 tablespoons in. So just make note of that if you do add more than the 2 tablespoons, that's going to change your nutrition facts. Okay, so just remember that. If you add more, you can't just pretend that you didn't actually add more. I know it's easier to do it that way, but that's not how this works.
Come on.
I know. Oh, I need this one for over here. I'm going to do this. Stir in my little tablespoon. So then we're going to stir this together until it's mixed nice. So looking at the nutrition facts, one of the things I love about this recipe is there's something I hate more than making protein bites and looking at the nutrition facts and see that one serving size is 1 little ball and it's like 80 calories. And I'm like, but really, I'm not going to just eat 1. You want a couple, you want to feel like you actually ate something. So this one is for 5 energy bites, which I'm like, okay, I can get around that. Like I can eat 5, like that feels like I actually ate something. There's only 130 calories and like I said, 9 grams of protein and 4 grams of fiber. So really, really good option here. So once you get this together, it comes together like a nice batter. And then I use my cookie scoop. I have a small cookie scoop. It's probably about the size of a tablespoon. So that's about the size of your balls. That made 30 of them. So it's about the size you're going for when you make them. And then put them on a cookie sheet or whatever. Although there's nothing in here that can't be at room temperature, they are a lot better in the fridge. They just firm up a little bit more, or even in the freezer. They just get a little bit of a firmer texture. They do freeze really well, so you could definitely store them, make them beforehand and store them up and have them ready to go. But as you can see, that one comes together really quick as well, and you don't even have to turn the oven on, which is always one of my favorite things about a recipe. Any questions on that one? No? All right, we will move on to our last one. We have our pumpkin pie protein smoothie. Is anybody a morning smoothie person? One? Couple? Yeah. I love having smoothies in the morning. They're so quick to come together, and it's an easy way to get lots of fruit right away in the morning and to get good protein with your yogurt that you're adding. And you blend it up, put it in a cup. You can have the cup on your way to work. And then your blender is like your little mini dishwasher, right? You just put your soap in, hot water, blend it up. You have a little mini dishwasher right inside of your blender. So cleanup is a breeze as well, which I always love about using the blender. So if you haven't tried smoothies for breakfast in the morning, just give it a try. It really goes pretty quick. And I think that you'll enjoy it as well. Okay, so with our pumpkin pie protein smoothie, looking at them, looking at the ingredient list, we are going to add them exactly in the order that they're listed. It makes it a little bit easier on the blender in the way that it blends. I'm doubling the recipe today, so what I'm adding in is going to be a little bit different than what you see there. So you start off with 1 frozen banana. Somebody asked yesterday if you could use just a regular banana, not a frozen one, which you could, but when it's frozen, it's like adding more ice, then it gets thicker, makes more of a smoothie consistency, and when your fruit is at room temperature, this will taste more banana-like at room temperature than it will frozen. So the idea is to have more of a pumpkin flavored smoothie, not as much of a banana flavored smoothie. So I definitely suggest that you freeze it beforehand, but if you're running short on time, you certainly wouldn't have to. Then we're adding our vanilla Greek yogurt. We're using that Oikos 001, sweetened with stevia, so there's no added sugar in here, and the flavor is really nice as well. Do make note that in your recipe for this one, this makes 2 smoothies. So if you follow this recipe and you have the whole thing, you're going to have to double those nutrition facts. And the reason that I have it set up that way is the idea of using half of a banana seems kind of odd. However, bananas freeze really well. When you go to stick it in the freezer, if you break it in half and put one in a baggie and one in another baggie, it'd be easy to just make one recipe of this. Or you make this for your family and it comes together really well also. Then we're going to add our cinnamon again for some good flavor. Pretty much cinnamons in everything fall, right? Just makes it all so good. And then our pumpkin pie spice.
Yes, right.
All right, then to sweeten this up, we are going to add pure maple syrup. So just as we're talking about sugar, just a reminder, sugar's become a really big topic that we talk about, and we're trying to limit our added sugars. And so some people came up with the idea of well, instead of using sugar, we'll just use maple syrup or honey, because that's not sugar, so that's okay, right? We can have as much as we want. The thing is that your body processes sugar and pure maple syrup and honey exactly the same way. So remember that maple syrup and honey is sugar, your body processes it the same. With that being said, sometimes using honey or maple syrup as a substitute for sugar works out really well because maple syrup and honey has flavor to it in addition to its sweetness, so you usually will end up using less of it. So you do end up using less sugar because it has extra flavor with it. But just a reminder, we don't have a free pass here when it comes to our maple syrup. So we're gonna add 2 tablespoons, or in my case, we're going to add 4 tablespoons. Perfect. And then we have our milk again that we're adding. Like before, you certainly could use a different version of milk if you wanted. And then we're gonna add our pumpkin puree once more. You just buy this pumpkin puree in stockpiles, basically. I feel like I bought out all of Lincoln's pumpkin the last week. And then all we have left is our ice. So the thing about this recipe is it's very forgiving. If you you want it a little bit thicker, you add more ice. If you want it a little bit thinner, then you would add more milk. So just depending on what type of consistency you like. So we'll add our ice in, and then we're going to blend it up. Hopefully, set this back. This is my special Black Friday blender, so you'll see it makes really good noises as we blend it up. Get good deals on Black Friday. Sometimes dinner's not gonna be that. We'll give it a little stir and then blend it one more time. And then we will be good to go. So you could, if you weren't talking during this, this would come together in about 5 minutes. There we go. Your smoothie is all done, ready to go. And you also could certainly call this a pumpkin pie protein milkshake.
Careful.
Oh, thank you. And then all of a sudden it's dessert, right? You could just trick people and tell them it's a milkshake instead, and it works that way. All right, guys. Any questions on that recipe, or are we just ready to try it all? Sure you try it? All right.